There's a Ranma RPG for the Super Nintendo! So, for those of you who don't know, Ranma 1/2 is an anime series that came out in the late 80s to early 90s, and it was one of those animes that was strongly involved in helping to bring anime as a genre to the eye of the West. It was created by Rumiko Takahashi, the same artist who created the famous series Inuyasha. It depicts the wacky and crazy adventures of one Ranma Saotome, a martial arts prodigy who happens to have somehow picked up a curse that causes him to transform into a cute, busty red-headed girl whenever he's splashed with cold water, and to revert back whenever he's struck with hot water. Add to that multiple arranged marriages from his father that he's stuck in, a dozen rivals all out to get him or marry him or her or both at once, and a love dodecahedron of relationships. It is, among other things, a comedy, a harem anime, a slice of life story, a zany, unpredictable adventure, an urban fantasy, and occasionally an intense shonen action series. It also has one of the most prolific and active fan communities on the internet to this day. To give you an idea, there are still fans of Ranma writing novel-length fanfictions that cross Ranma 1/2 over with just about every series known to man. While doing the research for this episode, I found stories crossing Ranma over with everything from Firefly and Evangelion all the way to Mass Effect. Mass Effect, guys! This series' manga ended its run in 1996, almost 20 years ago. And its fan base is still keeping it alive today. So, getting back to our original topic, Ranma 1/2 Treasure of the Red Cat Gang is an RPG released for the Super Nintendo in 1993, right in the middle of the Super Nintendo's heyday. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the decision was made to never translate and localize it, despite the fact that, at the time, all you had to do to sell a Super Nintendo RPG was to slap the letters RPG onto the box. What can I say about this game? It really took a little while to grow on me. At first, I kind of felt like I had to push pretty hard to get through it. Maybe it's because it's from a different time, and I've been somewhat spoiled by the conventions of modern games, so I have different expectations now. But in any case, it didn't really capture me at first. But for whatever reason, I found myself having a hard time getting into it. I don't think that's the game's fault, though. I think it's mine. There are just certain types of games that are harder for some people to get into, and I think this one is one of mine. The game did end up grabbing me after a while, but it took a little bit longer than I'm used to before it did. Maybe that's because in terms of mechanics, it plays a lot like the Final Fantasies of its day. But we'll get to that in a minute. Ranma 1/2 Treasure of the Red Cat Gang follows Ranma and his crew through yet another zany adventure, as a crew of thieves calling themselves the Red Cat Gang invade Ranma's town of Narima and kidnap his father of all things. Ranma immediately sets out after them, because hey, his dad might be an irresponsible little toad, but he's still his dad, and immediately gets drawn into yet another adventure. They come to find out that the Red Cats are apparently after 3 sacred artifacts which together can grant any wish, including either breaking the curse on Ranma or resurrecting the powerful spirit of the Ghost Cat King. The adventure takes them to a new and mysterious land where the majority of the game will play out. And throughout the course of the adventure, you end up running into or recruiting just about every normal member of the Narima Wrecking Crew at some point or other. It's not a bad experience by any means, it's just that it doesn't do anything we haven't seen Ranma do before. It's a typical example of why many fans of the series both love and hate Ranma. It's creative enough to place the cast in some truly unique situations, but not so creative as to adopt the challenge of exploring the long-term consequences of the events of each individual story. At the end of the day, you always end up right back where you started, with no real progress having been made. Still, the game is pretty for an old SNES RPG, and the characters are represented faithfully. It was nice getting to see the Ranma crew go on another adventure. Just don't expect it to do anything epic and new for Ranma. The game is best described as one really long movie-length Ranma episode in video game form. For the most part, Treasure of the Red Cat Gang follows the standard turn-based JRPG protocols of its time. The enemies are on your left, your allies are on the right, everyone has an attack, defend, special and item command, etc., etc. The game's items and mechanics system is taken straight out of the early Breath of Fire games, with your inventory limited to exactly 30 items, and each individual item taking up a slot. No filling up on okonomiyaki for you. Also, equipment effects are only fully shown when you're about to equip them. You'll have to do the math yourself in your head to figure out whether or not that sword is better for you. Ah, the good old days of RPGs, back when you needed the maths from school just to get you by. One thing that did bug me a little was the fact that in the game's menus, all of the characters' special attacks are basically still in Japanese. They've been given English text so you know how to sound them out, but that doesn't really give you any context as to what the attack actually does, and the animations don't always make it obvious what's going on. So unless you're heavily steeped in Ranma lore or can understand Japanese to a reasonable degree, you'll probably want to look up a guide. Also, instead of having magic points, everyone has an available pool of ki to draw from when using their special attacks, and there's no clearly displayed point system for its use. I would estimate that the average gauge has between 5 and 7 points of ki to expend, but that would just be me guessing. It's a very abstract system, but for my part, I found that it worked pretty well. In the Ranma series, ki is never fully explained in any real detail. It's always left somewhat vague as to exactly how it works, how strong it is, and how much of it various characters have. So having a bar that goes down and leaving the player to have to do a little guesswork seems to fit the pseudo-mysticism of it pretty well. There's also one notable upside to it. Ki regenerates over time, especially outside of battle. This makes characters like Shampoo and Akane very valuable, as their healing skills can allow them to basically serve as free HP fountains, up to a point. When it comes to this section of my reviews, I intend to be very selective about what I put in here. Much of the purpose of playing a game is exploring and discovering its secrets for yourself. That being said, there is one thing that I want to advise you about when it comes to this game. And it's not exactly a complicated thing to discover, but I found it to be extremely helpful in taking out difficult enemies like bosses, and I wanted to make sure to share it with you. Shampoo and Moose both have special techniques which buff attack power and damage. If you combine this buff effect with Ranma's Hishokyaku technique, it will result in easily the most damaging single enemy target attack in the game by several orders of magnitude. This attack can do 2 or 3 times more damage than any other attack in your entire party's arsenal, and can allow you to plow over some of the game's bosses in a relatively small number of turns. It is, however, rather expensive in terms of ki, so if you intend to utilize this strategy, you will need to dedicate some inventory space to ki replenishing items. At the end of the day, Ranma 1/2 Treasure of the Red Cat Gang is not going to appeal to a lot of players, simply because most gamers today are going to lack the background knowledge necessary to enjoy it. They likely weren't around at the time when Ranma was a big thing, and from a purely mechanical standpoint, there are certainly more well-designed games for the Super Nintendo. What I will say though is that if you ever had an interest in Ranma back in the day, or are curious about the series now, then you owe it to yourself to boot this game up and give it a try, as it is a legitimate Ranma adventure, and it is an experience that you likely have not had yet. I will also say that if you enjoyed the early entries in the Final Fantasy or Breath of Fire games, then you will probably find this game engaging and interesting too, as it uses many of the same mechanics. So consider giving it a try, and if you like it, then feel free to come back and see what other interesting experiences we can discover on Forgotten Games. And for those of you that like this show and want to support it, I've included a bunch of useful links in the description below. Please feel free to choose any of them you like. Remember, more support means better quality episodes and more of them. Also, I would like to thank my editor for helping me to put this show together. He's a fantastic guy. Feel free to give him some support too. Thanks, guys. See you next time.